It's the injury of the week.
Aston Villa defender Diego Carlos was forced off in their clash versus Everton last week. Technically not this week, but it's interesting, so we'll talk about it. With an Achilles rupture. The Achilles tendon is named after a Greek mythological character and it is very easy to find on the backside of the heel. It is that big fibrous band of tissue that you can quite easily see and feel. And those that paid attention in biology will know that tendon connects muscle to bone, and the Achilles tendon specifically connects the gastrocnemius and the soleus to the heel bone. And before we continue, there's two movements of the ankle that you'll need to know, just to make it easier for me to explain what's going on. There is dorsiflexion, which is the foot up, and then plantar flexion, which is the foot down. So the gastrocnemius and the soleus are the major plantar flexors of the ankle. So you can imagine the bridge between the calf muscles and the foot is the Achilles tendon. So any force being absorbed through the foot up into the calf for plantar flexion has to go through that Achilles tendon. And in order to dorsiflex your ankle fully, your calf needs to lengthen fully, and so does your Achilles tendon. So when we're talking about things that might rupture your Achilles tendon, naturally forceful plantar flexion, which can come from landing from a high ball, kind of step, change direction, will put a lot of force through the Achilles tendon, and then over dorsiflexion, which overly stretches the tendon. Now, I haven't seen the actual footage of Diego Carlos's injury, but you can take this example from Kevin Durant, which happened a few years ago. You can literally see the Achilles snapping and then that ripple going up through the calf muscle there. So the management of an Achilles rupture is actually quite interesting. Traditionally, it would have just been an operative approach. The surgeon would go in and then bring the two ends of the Achilles tendon as close as they could together to encourage healing. And then they would put them in a cast in a plantar flex position, again, just to stimulate that growth and that healing between the two ends of the tendon. But the research is actually coming out that a conservative approach to Achilles ruptures is a little bit more favourable. You get better range of motion outcomes, functional outcomes, and there's less of a risk of re-rupture in the future. Now, Diego Carlos himself went for surgery and he was seen in a boot at the training ground as well. So I think that research is probably just too new to be implemented just yet. An interesting trope about Achilles rupture rehab that kind of sets it apart from other kind of tendon rehab, for me as a physio anyway, it's probably not that interesting if you're not, is that it's all about dorsiflexion management. And yeah, when I say that out loud, it definitely is not interesting. But basically, the foot is locked into plantar flexion really early on, and then you're really gradually reintroducing that dorsiflexion over a period of around 8 to 12 weeks. So that does leave you with quite serious range of motion deficits at the end of that 12 weeks. But the reason they do that is because a stiff tendon is much better than an over-lengthened tendon that has a really high risk of re-rupture. So the boot that Diego Carlos was wearing most likely had a heel wedge in the back of it just to keep him in that plantar flex position. And then over the next few weeks, they'll swap it out for lower and lower and lower ones. And here we come to the point of how long does an Achilles rupture take to heal? And it's a really boring answer. It's similar to the ACL. It depends on the person. It's usually around 6 months, but some come back as soon as 3 months, some are 10 months. And if you remember Kevin Durant earlier on in this video, his took 18 months. And he's actually a perfect example of it depends on the person. He plays a sport professionally that requires a lot of plantar flexion, lots of jumping in basketball. So his Achilles tendon needed to be strong enough that he could dunk over 7-foot tall giants. The average person doesn't need to do that. And Diego Carlos doesn't need to do that, but as a professional footballer, he will need to be able to get up for headers, change direction, these kinds of things. And Aston Villa are actually quite confident that he'll play some games this season. I'm not too sure. I'd probably give him 6 to 9 months for a full rehab, so we'll see.